This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Zootopia 2 has come home to Disney+.
Let's go!
Get ready for a new case.
We're the greatest partners of all time!
New friends.
Gary the Snake.
And your last name?
The Snake.
Dream Team. New habitats.
Zootopia has a secret reptile population.
You can watch the record-breaking phenomenon at home. Zootopia 2, now available on Disney+, rated PG. And right now you can get Disney+ and Hulu for just $4.99 a month for 3 months with a special limited time offer. Ends March 24th. After 3 months, plan auto-renews at $12.99 a month. Terms apply.
Welcome to Her Extraordinary Life by Design, where we celebrate women who are shaping their lives one extraordinary day at a time. I'm your host, Leslie Gaudet, self-care coach for women who are ready to make self-care a priority to support them in life and business. Every week, I'll be speaking with inspiring women from various walks of life who will share their personal journeys and will discover how they have fearlessly carved their own paths as business owners, passionately pursuing their dreams and creating a meaningful impact on their communities. So let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to Extraordinary Life by Design podcast. I'm your host, Leslie Gaudet, and today I want to talk to you about the idea of strength versus softness. There's this pattern that I keep noticing that we've been taught that strength is what gets valued and softness is what gets us overlooked. That to be taken seriously, you have to push, you have to stay firm, and you have to keep your guard up, which means that being soft, having that soft, gentle, easy, flexible quality about you, automatically means that you're a pushover. And that's what gets you dismissed at work, overlooked in rooms where decisions get made, and underestimated by people who don't yet know what you're actually made of. And because we've learned over time that being assertive and leading with force is what's expected, what's rewarded, that it's a natural way to be, and because softness has never felt safe, because it's never been valued, then maybe it's why you learned to harden, not because it felt natural, but because softness didn't feel safe. And here's the thing that makes it tricky. When men are assertive, they're called strong, decisive, natural leaders. But when women are assertive, we're pushy, we're aggressive, we're too much. So you're caught, right? Soften and you get dismissed, or harden and you get labeled difficult. And somewhere in that double bind, you start defaulting to armor, even when it costs you. Showing up in the way you're constantly activated but never grounded, the way you push through when your body's asking you to pause, the way relationships feel strained because you've hardened to protect yourself and softening feels too risky, and the way quality of life is diminished because never being able to just breathe and be yourself is exhausting. And maybe you've told yourself that this is just what it takes to be seen as someone worth taking seriously. That if you want to be respected, you can't afford to be soft. That strength means staying hard, and softness means you're weak, you're not serious, you won't last. But here's what I want you to consider. What if softness isn't weakness, but the foundation of sustainable power? Not whether you're strong enough, but whether the way you're operating is actually sustainable. And just hear me out there, and whether softness could be your biggest strength, not your biggest risk. You see, when you're a woman in a position of power, whether you're running a team, you're managing a practice, or leading an organization, you learn fast what gets rewarded and what gets ignored. Being firm gets respect, directness gets results, pushing through gets recognition, and softness gets you dismissed. Softness gets you overlooked, and softness can get you replaced. So you adapt, meaning you learn to be firm, you learn to be decisive, you learn to deliver without flinching, even when you're not entirely sure, because that's what works. You earn the promotion, you get the seat at the table, you prove that you can lead, and you prove that you've got what it takes. But here's where it gets complicated and frustrating. Because although you earn the promotion, you get the seat at the table and you prove that you can lead, that you deserve the position you hold, the rules aren't the same for everyone. And listen, I'm not here to man bash, but let's just talk real here for a second, because it's been something I've noticed over the 4 decades I've been in the industry of law. And what I've noticed is that when men are assertive, they're considered strong leaders, but when women are assertive, we're most times Maybe not always, but I would say most times we're considered as being pushy. When men are direct, they're labeled as confident. When we're direct, we're labeled as aggressive. When men push, they're ambitious. When we push, we're difficult. So you're caught between a rock and a hard place. Soften and you get passed over, dismissed as not serious enough, not leadership material. Harden and you get labeled too much, too intense, hard to work with. And it feels like there's no way to win. So you default to force because at least force gets you in the room, even if it means you're constantly braced, even if it means you can never fully relax, even if it means gentleness with yourself, with others, feels like a luxury you can't afford. And you tell yourself this is just how it is for women in positions of power, whether you're leading, managing, or carrying significant responsibility. That softness is for people who don't carry the weight you carry, that if you want to keep the respect you've earned, you have to stay hard. And over time, you start to notice that the strength you've been operating from, the hardness, the force, the constant activation, isn't actually making you more powerful. It's making you exhausted. Your relationships feel strained because you've hardened to protect yourself, and letting your guard down feels too risky. Your nervous system never settles because you're always ready for the next challenge, the next pushback, the next person who questions whether you belong. And it makes you start to wonder, if I'm this capable and I'm a strong, competent woman who's good at what she does, why do I feel so depleted all the time? And why does strength feel like something I have to prove instead of something I already am? So, you see, this is what I'm talking about. If you're delivering at a high level, but you're constantly exhausted, if you're respected, but you never feel fully yourself, or it's becoming harder and harder for you to access that ease, that grounded presence, not about whether you're capable, it's possible that you're confusing performing strength with actually having it. And here's what I've noticed, like what's really becoming clear to me. And that's that cost of this reveals itself gradually over time in the way that you're always braced and ready for the next challenge, the next pushback, the next person who questions whether you belong in the seat you occupy. In the way softness feels dangerous to embrace, like if you let your guard down, you'll lose the respect you've worked so hard to earn. In the way you've learned to lead with intensity, because that's what gets taken seriously. And because you've been operating from that mindset where strength means pushing through, staying firm, and never backing down, leading with intensity becomes the only version of strength that feels safe. Until one day you start to notice that intensity isn't making you more powerful, it's making you more depleted and less approachable. And that's the first lens that we're going to unpack today. What becomes visible when you recognize that the strength you've been operating from isn't the kind that actually sustains you. Because when you're caught in the double bind, soften and get dismissed, or harden and you get labeled difficult, you're constantly calibrating how much assertiveness is acceptable. And there's no clear line. You're always activated, never settled, never at ease. Again, your relationships feel strained because you've hardened to protect yourself, and letting your guard down feels too exposed, too risky. And even when you know the game is rigged, that assertiveness in men is leadership and that assertiveness in women is labeled as too much, you tell yourself that if you just work a little harder, that if you can find the right balance of assertiveness with likability, you'll finally be respected without being penalized. But here's the truth. There is a way through the double bind. It's just not the one you've been trying, because you can't win by playing harder. And that's the second lens we're going to explore today. What is actually costing you when you're stuck in a game that didn't have you in mind, where softness gets you dismissed and hardness gets you labeled, and why defaulting to toughness depletes you even when it works. And then there's the third lens, which I believe is so important and one that can change how you think about strength and softness entirely. Because toughness that you wear to survive isn't the same thing as strength. It's what you use when you don't trust that you're enough without it. But what we often forget about softness is that it isn't weakness, even if that's what you've heard of and bought into. Because I believe that it's the foundation of sustainable power. Because when you can shift from leading with force to leading with softness rooted in self trust, you don't become less capable, you become more grounded. You're not white knuckling your way through anymore. You're actually steady. Because when you can take time to understand that the rules aren't equal, you stop playing from a game you can't win by playing harder. And you start operating from a strength that doesn't deplete you and actually makes you more effective without being exhausting. And really, that's what I believe is what we're truly unpacking today. What becomes possible when you stop confusing performing strength with actually having it, And you start recognizing that softness is your biggest power, not your biggest weakness. Now, you might be operating from the belief that softness is weakness and strength means staying tough. But here's what I want you to consider. When you allow that belief to take root, it begins to shape not just how you show up in your work, but how you protect yourself. Because when you've built the career through being capable, through handling difficult situations, through making the calls no one else wants to make, through standing your ground when it would have been easier to go with the flow, and that capability has been rewarded where you've earned the position because you could handle what others couldn't, where opportunities presented themselves because you proved yourself under pressure, and where respect followed because you showed you could carry significant responsibility without folding. Like I've said before, the rules aren't the same for everyone. Because again, when men are assertive, they're seen as strong and decisive. When they're direct, they're confident. And when they push for what they want, they're seen as ambitious, assertive in a good way. But when women are assertive, we're labeled pushy, aggressive, too much. When we're direct, we're considered cold, hard to work with. And when as women, we push for what we want, we're seen as difficult. And when this is a reality that you're navigating, when you see how differently the same behavior gets interpreted, depending on who's doing it, you learn to adapt as best you can. Not because you want to play by unfair rules, but because softness doesn't feel safe in that environment. Because being gentle got you dismissed, passed over, spoken over, not taken seriously. So you're firm, you're direct, and you push when you need to. And because that's what got results, you started to believe that blending in instead of standing out looked like weakness, that going along to get along looked like weakness, especially when you hold a position of responsibility, and that toughening up is how you survive. And I remember feeling that way too. Because I remember being told more than once over my 4 decades in the legal profession that I needed to develop a thick skin, which I interpreted as being harder, being tougher. Don't let them see softness or vulnerability. Don't let them see that anything gets to you. And for a long time, I believed that without that armor, I'd get walked over, that showing a more gentle side of myself didn't belong in the professional environment I was in, and that softness and competence couldn't coexist. You see, when you're constantly on guard, when being gentle feels risky, and when softening feels like it could cost you your credibility, you start telling yourself that this is just what's required when you're carrying real responsibility. That softness is again for people who don't have the weight on their shoulders that you do, and that if you want to keep the respect you've earned, you have to stay firm, stay sharp, and never let your guard down. And so you start measuring your strength by how tough you can be, not by whether you're showing up as yourself or performing a version of yourself, but by how much intensity you can sustain without breaking, believing that the tougher you are, the more respect you'll earn, that the less you soften, the more seriously you'll be taken, and that the harder you push, the more capable you must be. And that belief gets reinforced in the praise for being tough, like the stories of women who succeeded in the praise for being tough, the way, quote unquote, they say she doesn't take any crap, where that becomes a badge of honor. In the stories of women who succeeded by being harder, sharper, more willing to fight than anyone else, in the expectation that if you want to hold power, you can't afford to be soft, as if strength and gentleness can't exist in the same person. And so you normalize constant vigilance. You equate toughness with power because that's what you've seen modeled, praised, and rewarded. And over time, that becomes the standard you hold yourself to. Am I being strong enough by showing them that I can handle this without appearing weak? But here's what I want you to understand. Toughness isn't strength because you can be incredibly capable, delivering results, earning respect, and proving yourself over and over, and still feel like you're losing yourself in the process. You can be taken seriously and still wonder why it feels so hard to access the softer, more authentic parts of who you are. And if you're only measuring your worth by how much armor you can carry without cracking, then at some point you'll realize that toughness has been protecting you, but it's also been isolating you. And by the time you notice that, the habit's already deeply ingrained because toughness has become your default, because intensity is what feels safe and softness feels impossible to access, or worse, like a liability you can't afford. You see, the belief that softness equals weakness is why you can be effective and still feel like you're performing. It's why the respect you've earned doesn't feel like it belongs to the real you. It's why you're always on, always ready, always on guard, always operating from intensity, because this belief teaches you you have to choose, that you can't be both soft and strong. But that's the lie, because strength and softness aren't opposites, they're partners. And here's what that belief also doesn't account for. You're caught in a double bind, right? Soften and you risk being dismissed. Develop that thick skin, stay tough, and you risk being labeled difficult. And there's no clear line, no right amount of intensity that earns you respect without getting you penalized. And so defaulting to more toughness just to be safe, at least that way you're not dismissed, even if it means you can't fully be yourself, even if it means your relationships feel strained because you've armored up to protect yourself, even if it means you haven't truly relaxed in years. And like I said, what makes this so frustrating is that you can't win by playing harder because the rules were never designed with you in mind, which is why from the outside looking in, things often look fine because you're still doing what you're doing, you're still delivering, you're still earning respect, you're still holding your position. But when you're caught in the double bind, where if you soften, you get dismissed, or if you harden, you get labeled difficult, and you're so focused on navigating it, on finding the right amount of intensity that won't get you penalized, you don't notice what's happening internally because it is costing you in the way you're always calculating. Is this too soft? Will I be taken seriously? Is this too intense? Will I be labeled difficult? Will this version of me be acceptable today? And because there's no clear answer, no line that tells you when you've hit just right, your nervous system never fully settles, which leaves you always ready, always braced, always adjusting. And when intensity becomes your only option, when you've learned that being tough is safer than being soft, you tell yourself this is just how it is, that if you want to be respected, constant vigilance is part of the deal. So you see, when you've been operating from toughness because softness feels too risky, the cost doesn't just show up in how you feel navigating your day. It shows up in how you show up to meetings, how you relate to others, the version of yourself you allow other people to see, how you experience the world around you, the way you're always activated but never at ease, and the way your relationships feel strained because you've armored up to protect yourself and letting your guard down feels too dangerous. The way you finish a full day and can't name a single moment where you felt like yourself, like you're performing a version of you that you think is expected, not the version of you that is authentic. And when you keep going that way, when you stay tough because that's what's worked, when you brace today and you prepare to do the same again, rinse and repeat the next day, when you manage the strain as best you can because you've normalized operating this way without questioning whether it's sustainable, that internal work of figuring out how much intensity is acceptable as a woman, staying tough enough to be taken seriously, but not so tough that you're labeled difficult, that's what wears you down because the ease that used to exist starts to disappear and gets replaced by a constant question of, is this okay? The way you show up becomes a performance because getting it wrong feels too costly. You're effective in what you do, but you're disconnected from who you are. And even when you have days where you can point to your results and say, I'm doing well, when you step back and look at the whole picture of how you're actually operating, you start realizing that it just doesn't feel good, that you feel unsettled, like you're always on, like you're always trying to prove that you belong instead of knowing that you do, like you're managing perception instead of just being your emotionally intelligent and strong self, like you're holding it all together on the outside, but you're losing yourself on the inside. And because this pattern's so familiar, because so many women navigating positions of responsibility have felt some version of this, you rarely question it or even notice it because toughness feels necessary. Armor feels protective. And this kind of vigilance feels like the price you pay for being taken seriously. So even though you're doing well, you're earning respect, proving you're capable, there's a cost. Because all that work to prove that you're worthy of sitting at the table is costing you the one thing you need to sustain it all. And that's your sense of self. And the reason for that's simple, the double bind. It doesn't have a solution within its own rules, meaning you can't win by playing the game as it's designed because the game itself is the problem. When you're stuck in a game where there's two sets of rules, softness gets you dismissed and toughness gets you penalized, the cost isn't just about feeling strained. It's about what happens to your sense of self. Because when you're always calculating for approval, you lose track of what's actually true for you. When you're always performing the version that won't get you dismissed or labeled, you lose access to who you actually are. When you're always adjusting to fit what feels safe, you lose trust in your own instincts, and that's the cost that goes unseen. Not that you're ineffective, but that this way of operating, this constant being on, this vigilance, this endless performance, this relentless adjusting costs you your connection to who you are, to yourself. And over time, you start to forget what it feels like to just be you. That's what happens when you're caught in an impossible game and toughness becomes the only tool you trust. When you catch yourself in that moment where you notice that you're bracing again, calculating again, adjusting again, performing a version of you that overrides who you actually are, the shift can happen here when you can catch yourself thinking, have to stay tough or I won't be taken seriously. And it can become a chance for you to pause instead of just continuing the pattern, to recognize what you've been doing, to notice that you've been equating strength with toughness, that you've been proving your worth through intensity, and that you've been protecting yourself instead of being yourself. And when you start to recognize that toughness isn't strength, but that it's armor, then you start to notice the moments before you automatically toughen up, before you go into a meeting, before you brace when someone questions your decision, and before you armor up when preparing to deliver difficult news, and even before you tell yourself that once you've proven yourself enough, then maybe you can relax. And instead of defaulting to the same pattern of how to stay tough enough or wondering what it will take for you to be taken seriously, you start trusting what got you here in the first place: your intelligence, your skills, your ability to navigate complexity, the parts of you that earned you the position, not the armor you put on to keep it. And when that happens, that's when you begin to see things differently. When you start to recognize that softness isn't weakness, when you allow it to be part of how you show up, then you'll find yourself moving through your days differently, where you're not performing a version of yourself anymore, but you're actually being yourself, where you're not proving you belong because you already know that you do, and where your nervous system starts to settle because you're no longer fighting an impossible game. When softness becomes part of who you allow yourself to be, you don't become less capable. You become more grounded. You stop losing yourself trying to be acceptable, and your self trust deepens instead of erodes. You learn that softness doesn't diminish your power, it makes it last. It allows you to be effective without depleting yourself. It creates a foundation that holds. And what makes this so important is that when you start to experience what it feels like to operate from softness rooted in self trust instead of toughness rooted in proving, you start seeing yourself differently. And strength stops being about how tough you can be and starts being about how grounded you feel, where toughness is no longer proof of capability and self trust becomes the foundation. What I'm trying to say is that when softness isn't something you're aiming for, but what you're actually actively choosing, life doesn't just look successful, it feels right, it feels better because you're no longer calibrating for approval, you're trusting yourself. You're no longer hiding behind armor, you're showing up as you, as yourself. And when you make that shift from toughness as your only option to softness as your foundation, you realize that the way you've been operating from was never the only way, that there is another path. And once you experience it, what it feels like to operate this way, once you feel the difference between armor and authenticity, you stop tying your worth to toughness, you stop adjusting to fit what feels acceptable, and you stop playing a game where the rules were never designed with you in mind in the first place. Because you felt what it's like when being yourself doesn't cost you your credibility, when strength doesn't require constant vigilance, when softness becomes what holds you. And you begin to realize that softness and strength aren't opposites, they're partners. And when you recognize that, once you experience it, you realize the game was never about winning. It was about refusing to play by rules that were never designed for you and allowing softness to be your power makes that refusal possible. So I want to pause here just to let what we've talked about to settle in. Because if any of this is landing for you, if you're recognizing yourself in the constant calibration, the armor, the performing, I want you to know something, actually to remember something, that life isn't always easy to navigate, right? We're living in a world where the same behavior gets called leadership in men and too much in women, where you're expected to be assertive, but not so assertive that you're labeled difficult, where softness feels like a liability that you can't afford. And I want you to know that that's not in your head, that's real. Okay. And if you've been toughening up just to survive it, that's not weakness, that's adaptation. Like I said, I've navigated this too. The wondering if I'm acceptable today, the bracing before I even walk into a room, the forgetting what it feels like to just be me. And that's why I'm asking you to sit with this, to really let yourself notice what surfaces for you. I want you to take a moment and think about where have you hardened just to be taken seriously, not only at work, but in how you move through the world, in how you relate to the people around you, and the parts of yourself that you've learned to hide. And just notice, You don't have to fix anything. I just want you to see it, to notice what's coming up for you, to see what toughening up has cost you. Maybe some of your relationships feel distant. Maybe there's that version of yourself that you lost that you can't quite access anymore. The exhaustion of always being on. And then I want you to ask yourself, what would be different if softness was my strength, not my risk? Not when the world catches up, but right now. What if you could trust yourself without the armor? Because you already know. Your inner knowing already has the answers. You know when you're performing and when you're present. You know when you're proving and when you're grounded. And you know the difference between toughness and truth. And here's what I found for myself. When I notice I'm hardening, when I catch myself bracing, adjusting, or performing, I try to just pause, right? I just see what I've been treating as normal and to recognize what I've been telling myself is just how it has to be, that this is just how it has to be, that these are the rules that were put in place for me to navigate. But then I also ask, what becomes possible when I stop adjusting for approval and I start trusting what I already know? You see, the double bind doesn't go away. The impossible standards don't disappear, but something can shift because you can stop playing by rules that were never meant for you. You can stop measuring yourself by standards you can never meet. And you can start seeing that softness isn't what makes you weak, it's what keeps you whole. So just sit with that, not to figure it out, not to fix anything right now, but I just want you to notice and give yourself permission to recognize that you deserve to be yourself without it costing you everything. And this is something I guess I've been really sitting with this because I've sat with this conversation. I've really, really sat with it. And here's what I know to be true. When you find a space where your experience is recognized, where you're not there to be fixed or redirected, but just to be recognized, something in you settles. It's not because the world has changed, but because you stopped being alone in it. And what I'm talking about is community, which is a big part of the reason why I want to create the Yes Reset community, a space specifically for women in the legal professional world that I know so well. Because when we think about softness and how it gets confused with weakness, how the double bind leaves you stuck between being dismissed or being labeled difficult and what becomes possible when you stop playing a game that wasn't designed for you in the first place. That's the kind of conversation that I believe deserves a space like the one I want to build. And as I've shared many times, being in this industry for over 4 decades has given me a front row seat to it. And I know what it's like to work in professional environments like that, where women are caught in impossible standards, where assertiveness is rewarded in men but penalized in women. We're told to be strong and you show up that way, but then you get labeled as too much. And I believe that these professional spaces could be fundamentally different, better, if we actually made room for conversations like this, not just about surviving the double bind, but about refusing to play a game where the rules were never designed for women to win and about rewriting them. And that's why I'm gathering feedback because I don't want to build a space based on what I think you need. I want to build it with you based on what you are actually experiencing. And here's also what I've been seeing women posting anonymously because I've been looking around. One woman, she's so anxious about making mistakes that she over scrutinizes every word, constantly fearing her bosses will yell at her. Another one that I found was a pregnant woman handling a large caseload with little mentorship, considering disability leave because the anxiety is affecting her mental health and her ability to be present for her child that she already has. So, as you can see, this is really important. I think it's a space that's truly needed. And it's why I really want to gather perspectives from women who are actually navigating this world. And so if that's you, I'd love to hear your thoughts and I'm asking for your help. And based on what I've shared that I've been noticing, I want to know what resonates with you from what I'm seeing. What kind of support do you think would actually help? I truly want to know. So you can email me directly. You can find my email in the show notes and share what's resonating with you. And for those of you willing to go a little deeper, I'd love it if you would complete a brief feedback form, which you'll find the link in the show notes. And on that form, you'll share what kind of space would actually serve the challenges that you're facing or that you believe women in the legal space are facing every day, and what would genuinely help. And again, your feedback would be so greatly appreciated. So if that's you, please check the show notes, either email me directly, share what's resonating with you, or if you want to go deeper, I would really appreciate you completing the feedback form so that I can understand better what it is that you're actually thinking, what you actually believe that you need, what you're navigating. You know, what I keep thinking about as we close out our time together today is that somewhere along the way, we learned as women to treat ourselves like a problem to manage. Too soft here, too much there, adjust, calibrate, perform. And we've gotten really good at it. So good that it starts to feel like just who you are. But it's not, and it never was. When softness becomes your biggest strength, it's not some distant version of you that exists once everything settles down. You already are her. You already know, even if you haven't said it out loud, that there has to be another way. And maybe today was the beginning of giving yourself permission, not to have it all figured out, but just to be seen by you. And sometimes that's exactly where it starts, with just being willing to see yourself, the real you, clearly. Thanks for tuning in today. Till next time, keep dreaming, keep believing, and keep designing your extraordinary life one day at a time. Thank you for joining me on Her Extraordinary Life by Design. I hope you've been inspired and empowered by the incredible stories shared on this show. If you enjoyed this episode and the conversations we've had, I would greatly appreciate if you could take a moment to leave a review. Your feedback and support mean the world to me, and it will help others discover the podcast and join our empowering community. Remember to hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Together, we can continue to learn from these amazing women, uncover their extraordinary journeys, and be motivated to create our own lives by design. Thank you again for tuning in. Until next time, stay empowered and keep shaping your extraordinary life one day at a time.
Hey everybody, Diego here from the Candle Power Hour and Candle Power Records. Together with Electrocast Records, we proudly present Imperial Highway, a California sampler. 15 singles tracked by artists all based in California. Every song on Imperial Highway is mastered to deliver. Rock and roll is back, and we got what you want. If you're craving new music, Imperial Highway hits the spot. Download Imperial Highway. Check us out at candlepowerrecords.com and listen to the Candle Power Hour on Electrocast.
Hey guys, this is Peter Rafelson, and I am the president of Electrocast Media, and I am so honored today to introduce you to an upcoming podcast called Coding and Jamming with Jacob, and I have our very special guest and host of the show, Jacob Deal. Say hello, Jake.
Hey everyone, looking forward to getting started with you.
Tell us in 10 seconds what you're going to be doing on this show.
I'm going to be teaching everyone how to code from C to JavaScript to HTML, and on the side we're going to play a little music. I think you're going to learn a lot.
Sounds educational and fun. Count me in wherever you listen to podcasts.
Electrocast.